Hi, everybody. I think you're probably in the right place at this point. This is Smart Politics for the Holidays, how to uphold your beliefs without ruining your holiday dinner. I'm Dr. Karen Tamarius. For those of you who aren't familiar with me, I am the founder of Smart Politics, which is a progressive political organization. We're dedicated to teaching progressives how to communicate in a more productive and persuasive fashion with people who disagree with us. I'm a little different from a lot of doctors out there. I'm a political psychiatrist. And what I mean by that is that I'm trained in political science. I have a bachelor's degree in political science, and I've done graduate study in political science, specifically in political psychology. And then I also have a medical degree and did my residency in psychiatry. So I combine the knowledge of an academic political scientist with the training of a psychiatrist and the clinical skills of a therapist. And I bring all of those together in this work to help us bridge our divides and communicate better. My organization, again, is Smart Politics, and if you want to learn more about it after this, it's at joinsmart.org. So let me give you a little bit of an overview of what we're going to be covering tonight, because I think it helps to have the big picture before we kind of dive into the weeds. And the way I organize these talks is really around the kinds of pushback I get on the work I do. And the first objection that I hear to Smart Politics is, well, why should we talk with our Republican friends and family? Why invest in those relationships? Why bother talking politics at all? You know, maybe we should just not hang out with them anymore, or if we do, maybe we should just avoid talking politics. And so we're going to spend a few minutes looking at why I think it's important to do that anyway. The second objection I get, and it's probably the biggest, is people telling me, well, I've tried to do this and it hasn't worked, so I'm not going to do it anymore. And I hear you. I get your pain. I was there for a long time too. But what I'm here to tell you is that most of the time when we don't make progress on our conversations, it's because we're doing something wrong. So I'm going to walk you through some of the things that are common mistakes. And then we're going to go into what is Smart Politics, what is a better approach for these conversations. We're actually going to give you a demo, and right now you should all be thinking about whether you want to participate in a demonstration. What I'm always looking for is somebody who is good at channeling kind of an angry conservative relative, somebody who you've tried to talk with and it's been really hard. And that way I can model some of the things that you can do to make that conversation go better. After that, we're going to have a wide open Q&A time. We'll have some time for questions throughout, but mostly I ask that people save their questions till the end, and then we'll have an after party. So I like to hang out a bit after the webinar ends for people who are really interested in getting into the weeds in this stuff. I love talking about it, so I'm fine sticking around for as long as you need. So let's go ahead and get started. First off, why should I do this? I always like to show this picture when I'm talking about why you should do this, because honestly, what comes up for most people when they think about talking with their conservative loved ones about politics is that they just don't want to. They've had perhaps some really bad experiences. They've gotten into fights maybe, or you know, they feel like it's like banging their head against a brick wall. They don't make any progress. And so after a while, it kind of brings out our inner toddler. We're just like, no, this sounds horrible. I don't want to do it. I get that. And you should offer empathy and compassion to your inner toddler. But it's also important to be the grown-up in this, and acknowledge those feelings and then move on, to recognize that there are some really important political reasons why we have to be having these conversations. And I like to divide the political reasons into really two big categories. The first big category is the category of kind of working within our political system. So the kinds of things that we recognize a democratic system needs to do. And if we want to get policies enacted, we need to win elections, right? We need to get progressives into office, and we need to build political coalitions. So we need to build support for passing progressive legislation. That's one category. The other category that's really important to think about, though, is cultural. And I think it gets forgotten a lot because we're so focused on the political system that we forget how important it is to shift our culture in order to support a lot of the changes we would like to make. And one of the big changes that we want to do is just reduce political extremism, right? We want to bring people who are out on the fringes right now back toward the mainstream a little bit. They don't have to necessarily come over to our side or agree with us, but we really don't want to see them as revolutionaries. Another thing we need to do is fight prejudice and make people aware of systemic racism. That's not something you can do through legislation. We can work within the political system as much as we want, and racism is still going to exist. So the only way we can really raise people's consciousness about issues of prejudice is by having conversations. And then there is the issue that I think is on all of our minds right now, which is concerns about saving democracy. January 6th was a wake-up call for a lot of us, and we need to start talking with people to rebuild support in our institutions. I'd like to offer a bit of a caveat now to all of the things that I just said. One of the things about the work of Smart Politics is that we take into consideration in a major way the significance of privilege, and that this is primarily work of the conversations between peers. That there's a huge difference between a white person talking to another white person and a Black person talking to a white person. And so when we are dealing with situations where there is a feeling that you aren't fully represented in or fully recognized as equal, then you shouldn't be put in the position of having to advocate within a one-on-one conversation for your own personhood and your own value as a human being. So in general, we see the responsibility for Smart Politics as increasing with privilege. The greater your personal privilege in society, the greater your responsibility to have these conversations. And the greater your privilege on a particular issue, the greater your responsibility for having these conversations. Now, what I'd like to do at this point is explore a little bit whether it's even possible to change your mind on an issue, because sometimes I get some pushback on this, and people say, well, okay, we should have these conversations, but I'm not sure that anyone ever will change their mind, so maybe it's not worth all of this investment. So what I'd like to do now is have you have us do some breakout groups where you talk a little bit about things that you've changed your mind on and issues that your Republican loved ones have changed their minds on, because I want you to recognize that change does happen. So let's take a moment to just think this through, and then Locke, we can throw people into rooms, maybe what, 8 people
about
per room?
25 folks,
Or 8 rooms.
3
8
people
rooms?
or 4 people per room. Yeah, go ahead. I put the once you get into the room, you obviously won't be able to see this screen anymore. So I posted the questions in the chat so you can access them if you forget in the room and forget what you're supposed to be talking about. And we're going to give them about 5 minutes, I think, right, Karen?
5 minutes for this one.
We'll give you a
Yeah, you
heads
don't
up
need
with
a
a
whole lot of
couple-
time.
Yeah.
But the important thing is just, get in touch with the fact that change happens. Let's remember that this is not an impossible thing that we're aiming for.
All right. You gonna do, how many rooms are you gonna do?
7?
Do you want 3 or 4 people in each room?
3.
Okay, so yeah, 7.
Yep.
Oh, we lost a few. The thought of a breakout room scared off
Yeah,
a bunch
scared
of
them off.
people.
It caused anxiety. Is it going?
So yeah. No, they're not. It's not going. They're not in the breakout rooms.
Oh, did you hit?
I didn't do it. I thought you were doing it.
Oh no, I thought you were doing it. I'm sorry.
I just let them. I'm just going to do it then.
Okay. Okay. There we go. Hope you had a good discussion. Would anybody like to share some of the things that came up? What were some of the things that you have personally changed your mind on?
I'll jump in here. I was telling the folks in my breakout room that as I learn more and more about the coronavirus, COVID-19, my estimations of the risks involved in doing various things I keep having to adjust them. So I had assumed that if I was vaccinated, I couldn't transmit the virus, and then it turns out I was wrong about that. So there've probably been a dozen times in the last year where I've had to change the way I think.
Yeah, it's a bit disconcerting, isn't it? That it's so hard to have a clear idea of what's going on. Yeah. Anybody else?
I will take this moment to say, sorry, was someone speaking?
Oh, no, I just thought I would pop in with my own viewpoint. I only had one other person in the breakout room, but I'd love to get Dr. Karen's perspective on this as a psychologist. Rather than change opinion on both questions by virtue of discussion or conversation or anything like that, it came about as a result of experience.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
so like I had changed my view early on. I thought government was the way. Government solves problems. Government can do this. Then I worked for government and I said, oh my God, it's incredibly inefficient and all that, So the experience of working in government gave me a different perspective on government solving problems. Then we talked about my conservative brother, who was, very anti-gay. Now he's got a gay son. Oh, well, now he moderates his view a bit, So it's the actual experiencing of something in life that touches you personally, that may cause you to change an opinion or viewpoint more so than anything that someone tells you or a discussion or a conversation. Anyway, I just wanted to offer that and see what you had.
Yeah. Yeah, in these questions, I didn't mean to suggest that we're only talking about change as a result of someone encouraging you to change. There's also change that happens through other means. And a lot of times, the most important contributor to opinion change is experience. And I'm going to be talking more about that actually as we go through this webinar. So thank you very much for highlighting it. What about another, maybe one more issue that a conservative family member changed their mind on?
It sounds,
Yeah.
since I have a story that might, I have a cousin who's not Republican, but who did fall into the sway of anti-vaxxer propaganda. And so he became kind of quasi-Republican in his attitudes and didn't want to have his kids vaccinated. So I didn't have to wrestle with that issue head on, but I heard about it through the family grapevine, and it concerns me.
So, I'm sorry, clarify for me which direction the shift was?
Yeah, this was from being, I think, a progressive on most issues to being
Anti-vax.
Anti-vax.
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of us have seen that happen with a lot of people. People who previously didn't have see a problem with getting their children vaccinated or themselves vaccinated. As this issue became politicized, there's been a real shift. Great. Okay, so change does happen. Just wanted to put it out there. So the question for us isn't, can this be done? The question is, how can it be done? And I would like now to talk a bit about why a lot of times our attempts to change minds go so awry, and particularly why our conversations with family members, conservative family members, often blow up and just don't work for us. So the number one reason that conversations go off the rails is because we think people who disagree with us are bad or not very bright or evil or not rational. And this tendency to think people who disagree with us or behave in different ways or think differently that there's something inherently wrong with them that explains that difference is actually a cognitive bias. It's something we are somewhat wired for, to interpret the ways in which people think and behave. When we don't like them, we attribute them to something inside them rather than forces that are acting on them from the outside. But in reality, what science shows us is that this division in our opinions and worldview is really more a result of nurture, not nature. And if you want to predict what someone's political views are, the best way to do that is to know what the political views of their parents are, or what part of the country they live in, or what religion they were raised in, or what their race is, or what their gender is, or what their sex is, or what their sexuality is, or what their socioeconomic status is. And I hit some button. Just 1 second here, guys. There we go. And all of these are bigger determinants of someone's political views than anything going on with their personality. I know there's a tendency sometimes to talk about, well, the authoritarian personality, or the even people's more a tendency toward fear or anxiety, but none of those things are as predictive as these. The second thing we tend to think is, or do in these conversations, is that we tend to tell others what to think. And sometimes we do that very overtly. Like we just come out and say, you're wrong. Like the answer is obviously this, like guns should be outlawed, or that we absolutely need to change our immigration policy, or abortion absolutely is a woman's choice and there's no discussion, right? I mean, we've all been there, yes? And it's fine to kind of feel that way, but when you're in a political conversation, if you talk to people like that, you are not going to get very far. And why is that? Because people experience that as you trying to impose your beliefs on them, you trying to control them. And all human beings have a fundamental need to be in control of themselves. And when they feel like someone else is trying to control them, they experience reactance. And reactance is basically that thing, if those of you who are parents and you've had a delightful child who suddenly turned into a terror at around the age of 2 or 3, where every time you ask them to do something, they say no and do the opposite, or a teenager who refuses to do the right, the reasonable things you ask them to do. And that is reactance. That is them behaving in an irrational fashion, simply out of a desire to assert their independence from you. And I think the place we see this right now, pretty much everywhere, is on the vaccination issue. We have a significant portion of the country, probably around 25% of adults, who are basically saying, I'm not going to get vaccinated because you're trying to force me to get vaccinated. And if perhaps they felt more like it was their choice rather than something being imposed, they would be a little more open to it. So when people feel like they're trying to be controlled, it inspires them to do the opposite, even if doing the opposite is utterly irrational, and at some level they're aware of that irrationality. The third reason we run into trouble in our conversations is because we make people feel bad about themselves. And when I say we make people feel bad about themselves, I'm not always talking about overt name calling or overt shaming and ostracism even. I'm talking about often subtle slights, making people feel like they're not a member of the group, feeling like outsiders, feeling subtle degrees of contempt or looking down on people. And this is problematic because the need for love and belonging, the need for self-esteem are fundamental human needs. And you're probably familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but if you're not, Maslow was a psychologist in the 1950s who was trying to understand the roots of human behavior and human motivation. And so he came up with a hierarchy and he said, well, the first thing people need to do is meet their physiological needs. They're not going to worry about anything else until they have food, water, shelter, and sleep, and things like that. And then they're going to look at safety needs. They want to be protected and sheltered from harm, injury. And then only after they have those things, they're going to go out and get love and belonging and focus on feeling good about themselves. And the interesting thing about that was he was right to identify love and belonging and self-esteem is really important, but he actually got it backwards. New research suggests that love and belonging and self-esteem are even more fundamental needs than physiological needs and safety needs. A lot of people would rather be dead or sacrifice their well-being if they feel like they are outsiders. And being a member of a community, of having a sense of belonging, feeling good about yourself is actually in some ways the most important need that human beings have to meet. So what are the implications of this for political conversations? It means that in political conversations, people are going to go out of their way to meet their fundamental needs for belonging and self-esteem. And when that's not happening, they become defensive. And when people become defensive, they go into a state of fight or flight, right? And when people, and that's what a lot of us recognize as being triggered when, you know, you start, your heart rate goes up, your breathing goes up, you start to feel kind of angry and potentially rageful or fearful. In that fight or flight state, a lot of things happen, but one of the big ones is that we tend to go into cognitive shutdown. Believe it or not, when we're in fight or flight, the frontal lobes basically go offline and hand over control to the more primitive aspects of the brain. The parts of the brain that can't empathize with other people, can't plan ahead, can't learn, right? And that is really problematic in a political conversation where you are trying to teach someone about an important political issue. All right, number 4. You guys aren't gonna like this one, but the fourth reason you're running into trouble in your political conversations is because you're arguing with reason and evidence. Now, here's the thing. You look over here at this courtroom. The courtroom is a perfect example of a great place for arguing with reason and evidence. And the reason it works is because a jury and a judge are supposed to be unbiased, right? They are selected for that position because they are supposedly unbiased. They haven't heard the case before, or they aren't supposed to be friends with either the defense or the prosecution. And they make a pledge, right? They pledge to be unbiased. When you're having a political conversation with someone, in almost every case, they are not unbiased. They are coming in with a preconception of how the world works that they are very fond of. And so when you're having a political conversation and you start arguing with reason and evidence, it's essentially like if the prosecutor turned to the defendant and said, I'm gonna show you why you're actually guilty, and then presented their case and expected the defendant to concede the point. So we are dealing with an extremely biased situation. Now, one of the ways to understand what's happening in the brain during this is that our minds basically have a belief defense system that is designed to protect us against foreign ideas, and particularly bad foreign ideas. But as part of that structure, it really has a built-in bias for whatever we already believe. And whatever we already believe is kind of our cultural inheritance, the inheritance we got from our parents and our community and our religion. And that gets passed on to us. And for the most part, we accept all of that uncritically. And I want you to think, like, you're not, this is a little tricky to accept at first, but I would argue that is an evolutionary advantage. That makes perfect sense, because if those beliefs have kept your family and you alive up to this point, then it would be very foolhardy to just throw it out the window the moment some kind of new set of ideas were introduced. In addition, you don't have the cognitive capacity or energy to reevaluate your belief system every time some new idea comes along. So you have to be very picky as a human being about when you're really going to sit down and reevaluate your beliefs and possibly rebuild your entire belief system. And a lot of times when we're going into a conversation with people that we disagree with, that's exactly what we're asking them to do. We are asking them to change their worldview, to like go back and tear down a part of their belief system they've had for their whole life and rebuild it from scratch. And the mind is holding on to those things through things like motivated cognition, which causes us to examine things. We assume that things are right until proven otherwise, and we work really hard to uphold them until we absolutely can't. And we also rely on social cognition, which is basically looking at other people we trust in our community and seeing what they believe. And if they believe it, then it's okay to continue believing it. And finally, the fifth thing that gets in the way are our emotions. And I'm sure you've all been in conversations where you went in with great intentions, but before you knew it, you were triggered, and maybe you started yelling, or maybe you felt like you couldn't stay in the dialogue anymore and just had to get out. But just like we were talking about earlier with defensiveness and in the person you're talking about, when you get triggered, your brain doesn't function well either, and you stop being persuasive. You can't be strategic in your dialogue. You fail to communicate clearly, and perhaps worst of all, because emotions are contagious, you start to trigger others. So it becomes this really bad cycle where everyone is getting more and more emotional and less rational. All right. Are there any big questions outstanding, Locke, that I should know about, or?
Yeah, no, I just want to say to folks, we want to take a pause here. We're going to go to a breakout room here. If you roll back over there, why do people disagree with you? Nature, nurture, reactance, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, reason, evidence, belief system, emotions. Does anyone have any questions about any of that in the way Dr. Karen covered it? And if you have general questions that you just want to, put a pin in for later at the end, you can either post them into the chat and I'll try to circle back on them, or just hang on to them and save them for the end. But right now, if you have any questions about anything that we just covered that wasn't clear to you, this is the time to ask.
Yeah.
I just have one question.
Mhm.
How do you account for two people, I guess they're different genders, my brother and I, raised in the same household? I mean, obviously we're not twins. So I'm older, he's younger, he's male, I'm female. Is that enough differences to have completely different political views?
There are so many factors that go into these situations, and that it's hard to sort out in any given family why one person ends up differently from another. Yeah, gender can be important. A lot of different personal experiences can make a difference, who you end up forming friendships with. I think there's also just a huge element of randomness. The probability is just, sometimes it falls one way, sometimes it falls another. But what we do know overall is that these experiences are, over the course of being raised, are really important, and they just tend to be more important than what your personality is.
Well, I'm looking forward to learning more about what we can do to reduce reactance, since that seems to be a big part of the.
It is. It's a huge part of the problem. Absolutely. Before we move on to the solution, though, I'd like to do breakout rooms for about 7 minutes where you can talk about, rank maybe which of these, maybe one or two, you consider your biggest challenge. And chat with other people and share your experiences in the breakout room. So Locke, we have 24 people, so we could do 7 breakout rooms. Does that
Yeah,
sound
and I just want to say to both, Andy raised the question verbally, and Ari, Marie posted it in the chat room that yes, this is all, if we don't use evidence, how do we change minds? And we're going to do the breakout rooms, and then we're going to come back, and Dr. Karen's going to walk you through some of the smart politics, hands-on conversational tools that we use to not use evidence for the most part. I will post the breakout room questions in the chat room since you won't be able to see them once I send you off to the rooms. Recreate, so we'll shuffle you. Hopefully you won't get the same people you got before. And we're going to give you about 7-8 minutes, and Karen will give you a heads up when we're ready to call you back. And open all rooms. There we go. All right, see you guys in about 7-8 minutes.
I think Jenny ended up in a room by herself.
No.
Throw her into room 1.
No, there's no rooms by themselves.
Really? There they come. Welcome back, folks.
Hi, Jenny. Well, it's just us getting in here. We want to circle back to the question that you had in a little bit that you had posted right before we went in the breakout rooms in the chat. We're going to try to circle back and address that before we move into the next section in a few.
Hi, everybody. So how did the discussion go? What'd
Very
you
well.
learn? What was that? I missed it. Oh, Andy, you're muted.
All right. Yeah, I enjoyed our session.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the challenge that I struggle with the most, I'm not sure which of these categories it falls under, but just kind of a sense of hopelessness. Like, how could we possibly bridge our differences? And even though I practice the art of having these difficult conversations, I still despair sometimes that there seem so many people out there who seem just willfully resistant to being persuaded.
When you say willfully, are you referring to that reactance that we were talking about earlier, or is it something else?
I guess so. Yeah, I think it relates to that. I think the idea is that I conjecture elsewhere that we've built a culture where everybody feels entitled to their opinion. And that means that if you're interfering with my belief rights by raising objections, you're actually transgressing against me. And so criticism and actually the kind of dialogue that tries to seek resolution, that in itself becomes transgressive if you take this idea that we're entitled to our opinions as gospel seriously enough. So I think we need to rethink that conviction.
Okay. What about others? Which of these 5 things are you most struggling with?
Our group really connected with the number 4, you argue with reason and evidence, as well as number 2, telling others what to think. And I think an interesting thing that we kind of walked away with was that, the beginning kind of matters a lot with, for for what things are we looking at as truth and factual? And if those are two different things,
Mhm.
where do we go? And I think additionally, the end goal, you know, if you're talking with somebody that has a different view of how they want the world to be, that doesn't match yours. And
Mhm.
if that is different, it kind of left a lot of questions for what the middle of that conversation looks like.
Yeah, yeah, great. You're setting up the next part of this presentation very nicely.
Oh,
So thank
great.
you. Maybe, how about one more? Does anybody else want to share their challenge or challenges? Oh,
Feel free to jump in, but I'm going to go ahead and read a couple of questions that have come in the chat room.
Oh,
But
yeah.
if anyone wants to jump in, feel free to raise your hand or just jump on while I'm doing this. Before we went into the break rooms, Ginny had asked, can you talk a bit about opposing facts when engaging in conversation? Marilyn asked, said Dr. Karen hasn't not mentioned values as a basis for finding common ground in conversation. I think that will come up during the change conversation cycle.
Yeah.
And then Marilyn also asked how to discuss with those stuck in irrationality, lack of information, conspiracy theories, no respect for facts, inability to distinguish opinion from fact, all of which sets us up nicely for this next.
Yeah, I think maybe we should just dive in, because I think we're going to answer a lot of those questions over the course of the next portion, this last portion of the presentation. So this is what I consider a smarter way and is the foundation of smart politics. So I'd like to begin by defining what smart politics is. It's an approach to politics that I've developed, and out of a lot of time and frustration. And basically, smart politics is first and foremost an advocacy method. This is not simply have a civil conversation with someone method. It was very important to me to be able to have a dialogue in which I was able to advocate for my position, but still did it in a way that was respectful and productive. The second thing is that it is fundamentally interpersonal and relational. This is about what is happening between people, in the relationships between people. The relationship is at the center. The third thing is it is conversation based. This is about how you create change through actual dialogue with people you disagree with. Fourth, it is psychologically informed. And by psychologically informed, what I really mean is it's consistent with the science of how the mind works, how the brain works. And it's not driven by what we would like to be true, but by what really is true about the way people engage. And finally, it's fundamentally grounded in democratic values. I firmly believe that democracy is not about one group imposing its views on another group of people, but about a society talking through its differences in order to come up with solutions that we can all live with together. So conversations are at the heart of smart politics. What makes the conversations that we're having in smart politics different? And this kind of goes back to what's going wrong with our conversations right now. The first thing is our conversations in smart politics are designed to avoid triggering defensiveness. We work very, very hard to not make people feel bad about themselves. In fact, we work hard to make them feel good about themselves, because people have to feel good about themselves to change. The second is we bypass the belief defense system. So rather than moving head on into telling people that they're wrong, we very gradually lead them into new ideas in a way that they don't identify as foreign. Third thing is we try to talk about things in a way that increases rationality, increases self-reflection, increases empathy, and increases open-mindedness. And that's ultimately about keeping people kind of calm and centered and fairly safe in order so that they can think things through. And ultimately, we do all of this by meeting people's emotional needs in the conversation. Emotions are front and center in this work. The kind of the heart of the smart politics approach is a different understanding of how change happens in conversations. And I've developed this pyramid to help people have kind of a visual representation of what it takes for someone to really start to engage at a different level and start to think differently. Most of the time when people have a political conversation with someone, they start at the top of this pyramid in the cognitive section where they're talking about ideas and policies and beliefs. And that's exactly the wrong place to start with a political conversation. Where we really need to start is at the bottom of this pyramid and only gradually work our way up to cognition. And we need to invest far more time and resources into the lower levels than we do in the cognitive level, which once everything else is in place, doesn't take much work to shift comparatively. So I'm going to walk through now each of the levels in the pyramid and kind of explain how they work. The first level and the absolutely most important level is comfort. When you are talking with someone who disagrees with you, you have to make them feel safe enough to take risks and learn and grow. So you've got to keep them out of the red fight or flight zone where we know the cognitive portion of the brain shuts down and they go into a primitive mode where they can't empathize or think clearly or remember things or form new connections, right? We don't want them perfectly safe. So that's why I say safe enough. If you know, a perfectly safe conversation is a conversation where that you're having with someone who agrees with you on everything. You know, it's like a comforting conversation with your best friend that who has the same political beliefs. You're not going to grow or learn in that. What we want to do is stay in the yellow zone where the person feels safe enough to take a risk, but not perfectly safe and not over the edge. The second thing that needs to happen is connection. Once the person is made to feel like they're not in immediate danger because you're not attacking them or coming at them, telling them that they're wrong, you need to earn their trust. And trust is really about showing them that you're not a crazy person, that you're not going to turn on them suddenly and start telling them that they're a horrible person. And there are quite a few methods I've figured out over time to establish trust quickly. Some of those are things like saying upfront that it's okay that they view the world differently from you, that it doesn't change your view of them as a person. Yes, you disagree, you have your own view, you think they're wrong on that, but they're still a good human being. Another thing to do is to highlight the ways you are alike and the ways in which you do agree. One of the mistakes we make in political conversations where we disagree with someone is we put all of our energy into the things that we disagree on, even though, you know, if you were actually to sit down and list things out, you probably agree on 99% of your worldview. It's just this one area that you fixated on that is extremely different. So if you take the time to start delineating those areas where there's overlap, you're going to build a lot of trust. Another thing you can do is express a certain, make yourself vulnerable in a conversation. One of the great ways to do that is to acknowledge past errors that you've made, or to admit that you've been wrong about things in the past. So you might say, you know what, I know we've talked about this issue of abortion before, and I know I've gotten kind of overheated and I treated you rudely, and I'm sorry about that, and I'm working on that. And I hope we can keep talking about this issue now that I've put some investment into that. And that is a great way to kind of repair the relationship and rebuild trust so that you can go forward and have a dialogue in the future. The third step is to get some comprehension going. Don't assume that you know where they're coming from or what they believe. You actually need to do some work to get to a place where you learn what their perspective is. Now, for the most part, getting to know their perspective isn't so that you can refute it. We are not preparing for a debate or presenting a rebuttal. Getting to understand their position is really important for the purpose of potentially learning from what they have to say, for showing that you respect them enough to listen to what they have to say, and really hearing them out. You achieve comprehension by being curious and asking questions, and then listening to understand, not to reply. And then once you've gone through all of that, reflecting back what you've heard. One of the most powerful things you can do once you're starting to understand someone is to summarize back what they've told you. And you do that for two reasons. One, to check whether they actually, whether you actually understand what they said. And second, to show them that you were listening. The fourth level in the pyramid is compassion. And it's amazing once you start paying attention to this, how often we forget to do it. We're so busy arguing at the cognitive level, trying to make our point, that we totally forget that we're talking with a fellow human being who has their own feelings and emotions. So you need to show that you care. And you can do that through the usual ways: facial expressions, body language, words, sounds, whatever. But let them know that the way they feel about things matters to you, even if you don't feel the same way. And one of the stories I like to tell about this that I think brings this point home is when I was a practicing clinical psychiatrist, you know, and I would have a patient come to me and they would tell me, oh, I have, you know, a microchip implanted in my brain and the CIA is monitoring me, you know, obviously delusional. My response is not to sit there and argue with them about the fact that no, in fact, you don't have a microchip in your brain and the CIA isn't monitoring you. None of that's going to make a difference. What this person really needs in that moment is compassion. They need to know that I care about their well-being. So I don't come at them with no, I come at them with, wow, you must be suffering a lot. This must be really hard for you. How are you coping? And that is how we form an alliance that makes it possible for us to work together. And we connect around the things that are meaningful to both of us. And finally, once you've gotten through all of that, it is time to get to the part that I know you all wanted to start with, which was cognition. We ultimately want to have an influence on the way people see the world, right? And the trick here is that no matter how high you've gotten in the climbing the pyramid, at any point, you can still trigger the belief defense system. You can still trigger defensiveness and cause the whole thing to come crashing down. So even once you get to this top level, you have to be very careful in the way you talk about issues. Ideally, you want to present information in a way that helps the other person discover for themselves the truth, the reality. And one of the best ways to do that we've discovered is through storytelling. Telling a personal story about an experience you've had in your life that shines a slightly different light on the narrative that they're telling you. And that gives them perhaps a slightly different way of viewing the problem. And the beauty of personal stories is that they can't be disputed. They can't come back to you and say, well, that didn't happen, or no, you didn't feel that way. There's no ground for argumentation. And what you're trying to do is shift the structure of the belief system rather than shift the facts. The actual facts will fall into place fairly easily as the narrative structure shifts. So that's the pyramid. And you're probably thinking right now, oh my God, that is a lot. That is a lot to do in a conversation with somebody. And how do you make that happen? And so this is the way I usually focus on my conversations, the system that I've developed to make it all kind of come together. So the change conversation cycle is a 5-step process that you can use in any conversation with someone who disagrees with you. If you're initiating the conversation, let's say you're at you're hanging out over the holidays with a relative who strongly disagrees with you. Maybe they think the election was fraudulent and that Trump was really elected. So perhaps you're looking to initiate a conversation on that subject. And so the way you would do that is by asking some kind of very broad, open-ended, non-judgmental question. You might say something like, well, I've been following your posts on Facebook, and I've gotten the impression from that you were pretty concerned about the 2020 election when it happened. What's your thinking these days? Throwing the door open, very gentle, not implying any kind of judgment. Now, they may already know that you're a lefty and be concerned about that. And if that's the case, then you can acknowledge that and say, hey, I know we tend to have very different beliefs on this kind of stuff, but I'm really interested in hearing what you have to say and knowing if your beliefs have changed over time. So you've thrown that out there. Your relative starts to answer it. And maybe they say something like, yeah, absolutely, that election was stolen. Biden is not our legitimate president. I wish January 6th had succeeded. Your job is not to fight back or argue with any of this. Your job is to listen and to the best of your ability to understand what their thinking is on this. And when you think you have a good grasp of it, you can ask some follow-up questions. But once you think you got the big picture and they seem like they've pretty much told you everything they want to say, then your next job is to reflect back what you've heard. Okay, so what I hear you saying is that you're still pretty upset about the 2020 election, and you're really concerned that that Biden stole it, or that the results were somehow manipulated, and that Trump should be our president right now. Am I getting that right? If they say no, then say, oh, okay, well, can you explain further what I'm missing? Give them a chance to do that. If they say yes, then you go to the next step, which I think sometimes is the hardest for people. And that is, before sharing anything of your own view, you need to agree. And by agree, I don't mean endorse everything that they've said. Absolutely not. But what I do mean is that you acknowledge the places where there is overlap with what they're saying. In general, what I have found is that it's hardest to agree on policies, on politicians, on parties, and on facts. It is easiest to agree on values, on goals, and emotions. So in this particular case, what I would say is something along the lines of, you know, I don't know that I see the factual situation the same way as you, but I absolutely agree that our democracy is important, and the person who wins the election needs to be the person who is put into office. And if I had the same perspective as you, that Biden had the election stolen from him by Trump, I would be furious. And I don't know what I might be tempted to do in order to reestablish fair control. Like I understand those emotions. Democracy is important, and we need to protect the integrity of our political system. They will be shocked when you agree so forcefully on those. They won't see it coming, and it is incredibly disarming. They will not, that their defensiveness will melt away, and the guards on the belief defense system will stand down, basically. This is the point at which you can start to share a little bit more about your perspective. But again, do not make an argument, because like they will go on high alert again, and all the hard work you've done up to this point will be undone. So what would be a share that might be something that could move the needle a little bit? In this case, I might talk a little bit about my anxieties following the 2016 election, and say, you know, I can appreciate kind of that uneasy feeling that comes when you don't have a transparent voting process. Like, it's really hard for us as individual citizens to know what's going on. Like, we need to trust our leaders and the people whose job it is to do the counting of the ballots, in order for, you know, the system to work. And I think in recent years, trust has been kind of undermined. And I think, so I can relate to what you're talking about. And I wonder if, you know, the place I go with this is really wondering about, how do we make sure our system is safe no matter, you know, regardless of who's in office? Like, put aside Democrats versus Republicans for a while. How do we rebuild our faith in our political system and in our institutions? Like, what would it take for you to believe that Trump was fairly elected? What would it take for, the Biden was fairly elected? What would it take for me to feel comfortable believing that Trump was fairly elected? And I would follow up on that. And that is my next ask. So I'm leading into a new question. The discussion is on a much different level at this point. It's essentially gone meta. And so we've gotten out of the unproductive, factual debate, which I'm probably not going to be able to make progress on. And we found common ground to explore. So that is the change conversation cycle. Where do we stand, Locke, in terms of time and questions and all of that goodness?
Yeah, we're good on time. I always want to like frame this a little bit. Sometimes people ask, we throw the change conversation pyramid at them and then the cycle. I think of the pyramid as the goal. That's what you're trying to do is get up that pyramid. The conversation cycle you can almost think of as like grappling tools or climbing tools that you use. The more minute, specific tools you use to achieve the larger pyramid goal.
Mhm.
And the other thing it's always good to point out is that while the change conversation cycle you see here is a nice compact little circle, in reality, it doesn't always function that way. It may be that you get halfway through the cycle in one conversation. You may stop on number 3 in one conversation. You may get all the way through the cycle, and then the next time you talk to them, you have to start over again. So it becomes more of a less of a circle and more of a looping process that may continue over a half a dozen, 24 conversations over the course of weeks, months, even years. So don't feel like I've got to get through all 5 steps in the next 30 minutes while I'm talking to this person. Say, hey, I want to get through steps. This is a particularly tricky conversation, so I'm going to just aim for steps 1 and 2 this time. And if I get through those, I'll feel like we got somewhere. And then, Karen, what is the measure of whether or not the conversation was successful?
Yes. So the measure of a successful conversation, my friend David Kant, who's the creator of the White Ally Toolkit, and if you are not familiar with that, you absolutely should go to whiteallytoolkit.com and check it out. But he says a conversation is successful as long as 2 things are accomplished. And the first is that you at some point express yourself authentically. And the second thing is the other person wants to talk to you again. So we do often have a fairly low bar when we're, particularly initially, when we're having these conversations, if there's been a history of conflict, when the topic is something extremely contentious, like racism or abortion. These are things where people tend to kind of have low tolerance for the dialogue. And so getting in there and getting out with, saying something meaningful and not causing a blow up can be huge.
Do we want to move on to a demo now,
Yeah.
or do you want to take some questions? Which would you like to do?
Why don't
first?
we do a demo so people can see it in action, and then just they're the doors wide open for.
So if you've been asking questions in the chat, we're going to circle back to those in a few minutes here. But first, we need a volunteer. Now, what the volunteer, you want to tell them what that involves for them? Remind them?
Yeah, so I'm really looking for a volunteer to be somebody, like have someone in mind that you can kind of channel during the conversation, someone you've had difficult conversations with in the past, or maybe you've just been afraid to talk with because you've seen them have difficult conversations with other people. Can be on really a topic of your choice. Some of the things that we've talked about in the past are like climate change or abortion or Black Lives Matter. What are some other things, Locke, that we've talked about?
Well, vaccination or
vaccination, absolutely.
We have Marilyn is very kindly volunteering.
Thank you.
Marilyn, if you want to unmute.
There you are.
There you go.
Hi.
I interact, there's just so damn many conservatives. I interact with a lot of them, so I can channel. Go ahead.
Fabulous. What is there a particular issue you want to discuss right now?
No, I can handle them all. I can handle You pick, girl.
I pick.
Let's
And
ask
my-
this while Karen's thinking.
Impressed with your qualifications. It would be great to have a discussion because there's some things I disagree with a little bit, but I love you're doing this. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, and
more
then,
than
and
welcome.
again, Marilyn, you've asked a lot of questions in the chat. We'll definitely circle back to those. For
There are
the
more
top,
There are more comments than questions. It's just
Okay.
kind of challenging, Dr. Karen, but
Okay.
it's what I do. It's what I do. Go ahead.
well, while we're thinking about this, does anyone want to put in the chat a topic you'd like to see them
Oh,
discuss?
that's
Yeah.
a good idea.
Yeah,
Throw something out there.
Yeah,
Transgender rights.
That's a great one.
ooh, that's difficult for me, but okay. I mean, that's not one I'm as, I haven't had a lot of discussions about that issue, but almost any conservative viewpoint, I have had discussions with conservatives. I'm well aware of their perspectives. That's a little difficult for me, but.
Okay, well, we'll choose one where
Yeah,
you
it's
have a
just
little more
something I have-
experience.
Yeah, transgender is not something I've had a lot of discussions with conservatives about, but I know the story. Hey, here's the proof of it. I'm from Texas.
Good.
And they're anti-transgender and they're anti-bathroom thing and, you know.
I think it would be
How,
really,
how,
I think it would be really helpful to watch a role play debate about COVID, just given the
Okay, I
situation. I
can-
wonder if you guys would be willing
I
to
can
do that.
do you want to do that?
Because guess what? That's worldwide, baby. That's
Yeah.
worldwide.
Okay, fabulous. Let's do it. Hi, Marilyn. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing well. I'm just so glad I didn't get that vaccine. There's all these people keep talking about now they're getting boosters. Oh my God. It's like they're going to have 3 microchips put inside of them. It's unbelievable that people are so submissive to this government manipulation. It is unbelievable to me. I can't believe it. I'm so sorry for them.
You know, I'm a little scared to tell you this, but I got vaccinated.
Well, that's your problem. You know, I mean, if you want to harm yourself, I don't want to harm myself. All the evidence clearly shows that the vaccination is actually more harmful than the COVID. It's, you know, the government has manipulated the death rates. They've manipulated everything about the COVID. They've told us it's safe and all that stuff. It's not. I've known people who have now have high blood pressure, blood clotting, and heart attacks because they got vaxxed.
Wow. You sound
I feel bad for them because I was smart enough not to do it. I tried to tell people, but they don't listen to you. You know how it is. You know how it is.
Yeah, well, well, you sound, I gotta say, Marilyn, it sounds like you're really upset about this.
Oh, no, I'm not, because I didn't submit. I feel bad just that my government, not to mention the whole damn world, is run by a cabal of like Dr. Fauci's and the World Health Organization and all these people that are trying to control the population, take away our freedoms, and monitor everything we do through this goofy vaccination. Bill Gates is making billions off of this. It's unbelievable.
Wow.
I just feel bad for the people that have submitted. That's all.
Well, it's I think it sounds like you're worried about other people, and I can definitely, yeah. And what I hear you saying is that there are some people out there right now who are doing things that are very damaging to others, and you're worried about it.
Yeah, exactly. Because they're trying to convince us that not getting the vaccine is somehow damaging others when it's actually the opposite. Getting the vaccine is damaging people, and those are the people that are causing the mutations and the variants to call, I've read all this. I've researched it carefully on internet. And there's a lot of well-respected doctors that are talking about this. There's very easy cures, not cures so much, but treatments you can take, like vitamin D and ivermectin, and all these things that you can take. Look at Aaron Rodgers. I mean, my God, the guy wasn't vaccinated. He got COVID. He's back playing football and he's doing great. It's all made up by the government.
Well, the impression I get is that you see COVID as not being as dangerous as getting vaccinated, and you think that this is probably some kind of a ploy, like some people are getting something out of it, and you think that it's kind of a trick, like, and you're not going to fall for a trick.
Absolutely, I am not going to be a sheep. Absolutely. I am not going to follow this government mandates and all this stuff that is trying to control the public and take away our freedoms and our civil rights. I have a right to my body to treat it with natural things. It is horrible that this is going on. Just horrible.
Well, Marilyn, obviously I got the vaccine, so you and I have different views on that, but you're saying a lot of things that I can really relate to. I mean, I also think being free and having control of my body is incredibly important. Like I get that, absolutely. And I'm a little suspicious sometimes of pharmaceutical companies,
Absolutely.
right? They have such a financial interest in producing this stuff, and I don't know that they're always looking out for my best interests, right?
Absolutely. And Dr. Fauci's in bed with them. Absolutely. He's helping them make profits by promoting this vaccine. It is unbelievable.
So I think that thing that always
people not see it. I don't mind that you got it. That's your problem. You get to make your choice. You get to make your choice. And if you harm yourself, that's your choice. But it's like, why are people so submissive to this? It's amazing.
That's the other thing you said that I really agree with is that we don't want to be in the position of just going along, right? You don't want to do something, make a decision just because everybody else is doing it. We want to make sure we're doing it for a good reason and that we've investigated whether or not something is safe.
Yes, I investigated it and I'm making my decision. You can make your decision. I'm not criticizing you. If you want to harm your body, that's your business. But nobody should be forcing me to do something to harm my body. There's no reason for that, especially in the United States of America.
So can I ask you something, Marilyn?
Sure.
Why do you think I got vaccinated?
I have no idea, but I think most vaccinated people are fearful. They buy into the fear mongering that's done by the government and Big Pharma and Dr. Fauci and all this, they believe they're going to die or something if they don't get a vaccination. It's silly. The numbers are so small. It's like a flu. It's like a flu. I mean, my God, people, they're blowing this up into something way like a mountain out of a molehill. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. So for you, it's just not clear how much the risk is. Yeah.
No.
I don't think the decision was difficult for me, but I did think about it. It wasn't like something where it was just like an automatic decision. I think that
I hope you understand, I'm not criticizing you. That's your business. That's your choice.
I
But
appreciate
nobody's
that.
telling me what to do.
Yeah,
if you
no,
make a
absolutely. And
Yeah, if you
Marilyn,
make a misjudgment about your own health and you go and put
yeah,
the X in your body, that's your business.
yeah. And Marilyn, I would never tell you what to do. You're a smart lady.
Yeah,
You're a smart lady.
I know.
But can I tell you how I made my decision though?
I'd love to hear it. I'd love to hear
Yeah.
it.
Well, so the things that were really important to me were, you know, I have I'm not super high risk for like if I get COVID, but I have asthma. I have a history of breast cancer. And I have family members who are on steroids. So I was kind of like, you know, yeah, the likelihood of me having yeah, I'm a little higher than average, but also there are some people around me who, if I gave them COVID, are super high, you know, risk. And so that was where my decision came from. And I'm certainly not saying that means you have to do it too, but you know, I just want you to know where
I totally hear what you're saying, but you bought in on the BS because guess what? You can still get COVID and you can still give it to those people.
No, you're totally right.
Harm the people in your family that you care about. So you better be wearing your diaper on your face, you know? Because
Yeah.
that's, you don't have it.
No,
You don't
you're
have it
absolutely
together. You
right,
don't have
Marilyn.
all the facts. I don't have a problem with you getting your vax for whatever reasons you chose to do so, but realize that they're BSing you and you can still give COVID to others.
Thank you. All right, we're gonna call time there. Marilyn, that was the best ever. Thank you
I know,
so
I
much.
told you I can
You
play this.
were perfect. I wish I could have you on every webinar because that was exactly right.
Wait, I told you I can play this. And now just to clarify, I have already gotten my booster. Okay.
I just want to say, Marilyn, that I'm personally triggered by some of your comments about Aaron Rodgers.
Thank you.
Bravo.
Do you guys have I want to we'll touch base here in a second. Do you have any questions about what you just saw from Karen and Marilyn? Anything you want clarified about how either one of them were reacting or participating? Yes, Marilyn, you did a fantastic job.
I want to know how Karen can keep a straight face.
Practice. Yeah. I teach another webinar about emotion management for this kind of work. And it really is having experience having these conversations that makes you get better and better at it. And you need to develop a tolerance for it.
Can I just say one thing I really liked? Karen, I really liked when you asked if you could share what your reasoning behind it. Because then it's like, it's just more engaging. It involves her. It's like she's already consenting to agree with you. And you're not, it's not like I need to go take the buns out of the oven, or I need to go, or they're mad and they're not in a good headspace. It just kind of confirms that you're on the same page to have that conversation.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. That is actually an evidence-based practice. There's research showing, and it's in the motivational interviewing field that shows that when you ask people before telling them your story or providing them with information, they're much more receptive to it. If you just say to them, here's a paper, I want you to read it, they feel it as an imposition, it's threatening, they feel that you're kind of implying that they're stupid. But if you ask them if they'd be interested in learning more, it respects their autonomy, right? You avoid that reactance. And then they also then make a commitment to you that makes them much more likely to actually read that material.
And they're also you're drawing them into participating in that permission. So they're now an active participant in you giving that information. I just keep thinking of like in vampire lore, the vampire has to ask permission to come into the house, you know? And then once you've given that, then you participate. That was a stupid metaphor.
Well, at least now we're all going to remember that.
Other questions about that particular exchange?
So yeah, I'd like to ask, Karen, amazing job of keeping your cool and striving to lay the foundation. And I'm looking at your 5 C's pyramid here, and I think you did a terrific job of trying to create an environment that was comfortable, where connection could form. You really worked hard to create that sense of connection and show that you comprehended what she was saying. I think you expressed compassion really well. Would you say that you got to stage 5, or to the stage where you actually were encouraging Marilyn to rethink? Because I'm not, if so, I'm
slightly, very, when somebody, it's very hard to engage at that 5th level when someone is so wound up, right, emotionally. When she was pretty much triggered through that whole thing. A lot of what I was doing was trying to talk her down, and there were a few times you might have noticed where her energy kind of dropped, and she seemed calmer, and then she would kind of rev back up, and like that. She was on a bit of a roller coaster. So during some of those moments when she calmed down more, I tried to shift things a little bit by telling my story. That was really my cognitive engagement. And one of the biggest things there was shifting the narrative, right? So her narrative was that the vaccine is really, really bad, and people are sheep. And people are, and the government is trying, or there's a cabal, right? A group of very dangerous people who are trying to hurt us. I tried to tell a story of some people are really scared about COVID, not terrified, but, concerned. And they've thought this through and have some real serious reasons why they might want to take it. And so that is, I didn't come at her with my narrative is right and your narrative is wrong. I came at it with, here's another way of looking at this situation. And we know that sometimes that is the most powerful way of changing minds, is just by gradually shifting attention. There's some really interesting research specific to vaccination that shows that one of the big mistakes that pediatricians make in conversations with parents when they're talking to them about vaccination is focusing exclusively on what the patients or the parents see as the dangers of vaccines. And they found that a much more powerful intervention was just to talk about the dangers of disease. So not to talk about like all the reasons why vaccines aren't dangerous, but talk about all the reasons why the diseases are. And that shift of attention is enough to change behavior.
Yeah, nicely done. Thank you.
Before we move on to the Q&A, I also, a couple things I want to circle back on. One is while you and Marilyn were doing that, people were praising your patience and your in the chat. One of the things that really helps me with the patience part is the impatient or the intolerant part of my personality comes from that number 5, the facts, the cognition. If you set that aside and just focus on the person and the empathy. And so I don't want to say you ignore what's coming out of their mouth, because you don't want to ignore it, because you want to address it in the conversation. but you try to take your emotional weight off of what's coming out of their mouth because you're focused on that person. So it's not that Joe is saying stupid, crazy stuff. It's that this is my friend Joe and I want to talk to him. And I want to listen to what he's saying and I want to address it, but I want to keep my emotional weight on him and as my friend and as a loved one or a relative or an uncle or someone I want to have empathy for, and try to hold loosely the facts or the statements that are coming out of their mouth that might be very triggering to you.
Right. You're absolutely right that I try not to pay. I pay as little attention to the facts coming out of their mouths as I need to just reflect back effectively. Once I get the big picture story, that's fine. I don't need to know all the details. I just need to be able to bring back the narrative and the emotions behind it. What, you might have noticed that I mentioned how she was feeling several times. But one of the things I didn't mention earlier tonight is we have this like misconception that political opinions come from our beliefs, right? That we have this view of the world and we have these facts. And then because we believe these facts, then we have these policy positions and support these politicians. But research shows it's the exact opposite. As a matter of fact, our policy positions, our attitudes toward politicians all precede our beliefs and our knowledge. So what we do not reason to form opinions, we rationalize opinions we already have. And so when people are throwing facts at me, and reasons at me, what I'm thinking is, oh, that's their rationalization for why they feel that. They have a gut feeling, and this is what they're coming up with to explain that gut feeling. So I know that if I go after those facts and reasons, it's not going to shift the gut feeling. The gut feeling is still going to be there. And actually, if I dislodge a fact, if I do somehow magically manage to convince them that fact is wrong, the gut feeling isn't going to change, and they'll just come up with another fact that they think, or another reason that they think justifies having that position. Does that make sense?
So I want to touch base with you, Karen, about where to proceed next, because a couple things we could do. We have a lot of really great questions and comments in the chat that we want to be sure to address. So if you've been putting your questions and comments in the chat, we're going to get to them. But the other thing is, I did like the question that Kate raised about transgender. I was wondering if someone wanted to like do another demo with somebody else taking your role. If someone else wanted to try, someone feeling really really brave and try to discuss that with Kate, or if you want to do it, or if we should just set that one aside for the future and move up back onto the Q&A part.
Let's keep doing Q&A, and then if people want to stick around for after party stuff, we can try to do that there. How's that?
Okay.
So
I have a whole bunch of questions and comments. In fact, I tried to sort them, and even the sorting is too long. So I would say that if you had something you really wanted to bring up, ping it again, or raise your hand. Just raise your hand. But in the meantime, I will go back here. We kind of talked about about not using facts. We talked about values a little bit, I think you discussed. How to discuss with those stuck in irrationality, lack of information, conspiracy theories, no respect for facts, inability to distinguish opinion. I think we kind of covered that. That's from Marilyn. Sam, you've raised this question a couple times here. I want to make sure we get to this. When religion, I'll read if you want to jump in and state it, but I'll read what you posted. When religiosity and evangelical upbringing seeps into the personality long after actual religion has an active role in their life, but that theme of evangelizing the need to convert regardless of rational reason, how do you confront that type of personality? And then Sam, I think you posted that back up again, something just recently. I'm having. Oh, my question about religiousness as a personality trait ingrained in the Republican culture, projecting religious culture. And Sam, so I'm probably mangling your question. Do you want to ask it directly? Is Sam Hill still here? Sam's still here? Yeah. It's up to you if you want to ask directly. There you go.
Hi, Sam.
Yeah, I was just wondering because it seemed, because I live on what I would consider the rhinestone of the Buckle Belt. I
Yeah,
mean, sorry, of the Bible Belt.
yeah, yeah.
And there are so many grown adults that grew up in such an evangelical upbringing that I really see it. And that they're not going to church anymore necessarily, and church isn't necessarily a part of their solid reasoning anymore, but that culture is still there of needing to convert to now Trumpism and that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
So you're asking, does that religious or evangelical background create a difficult hurdle or a different approach? Is that what you're? Is that kind of-
Right. Yeah, it's just it creates a type of personality that we're going against that is not. It's just based on like teams and just kind of like they were raised with their denominations being pinned against each other and churches competing over church stuff just to have the most members. But now, once you've kind of grown up and maybe separated from that a little bit and you're grown adults, but that part of your upbringing is still with you. So that's what I'm seeing.
yeah. So there, it sounds like what you're confronting is sort of a religious fundamentalism, and a kind of a rigidity in one's beliefs. Is that fair? Okay. So just the people in that group can still change, but it usually takes a lot of time. It is hard because in part they've been taught not to question certain things, and questioning things for them is scary. It is there are certain precepts that things you never think about, questions you never ask because they are off limits, and that means that they're more likely to go into that kind of fight or flight when you start to touch on those subjects. So if you hit up against them too hard, then they're going to start arguing with you or get defensive, or they're going to say, no, I'm not going to talk with you about this, and take off. And so what you need to do in that situation is be even more gentle and more careful and create that safe space for the dialogue that lets them know that you're not trying to threaten their religion or undermine their belief in God. You just want to understand how they reconcile some of the things they've told you, perhaps. But you have to keep reassuring them that this is not going to cause their entire belief system to come tumbling down, because let's face it, that's a terrifying prospect. Nobody wants their entire belief system to come tumbling down. You wouldn't know what to do with yourself. So it has to happen. They have to reconstruct parts of their belief system very gradually, and you have to emotionally support them through the process. You have to let them know that you have a very strong identity here, and it's okay if you have some differences of opinion with this group. I'm going to be here to support you. Does that make sense?
Kind of, like, I guess
It's a lot of work.
recognizing, like, just holding a space for them to, I know it's scary, but
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's really hard work.
Mhm.
Absolutely. And you know, for me, I stick with this work and do it for the reasons I outlined at the beginning of this webinar. Like, I think it's absolutely essential in terms of if we're going to save democracy. I think it is essential if we're going to fight prejudice and achieve our progressive goals. But yeah, these conversations are hard. But you can also, you know, have them in ways that can strengthen your relationship with your family members, because often when we have such divergent views from other people, you know, we just avoid them because we don't want to deal with it, and that creates a distance in our relationships. And there's some great people out there who have these beliefs, and you know, that we disagree with, that we could still benefit from staying close to.
I want to keep moving on. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Sam. Sorry.
okay. Thank you for answering that, though.
Yeah.
Thank you for the question. I've got a lot of good stuff in the chat, kind of going recently and going back a bit. I think along those same lines, Ari, a long time ago, Ari Marie asked about an hour ago, is it possible to change the mind of someone who believes in conspiracy theories? And I think a lot of what you addressed with the religious evangelical question might translate a little bit to the conspiracy theory minded person.
Sure. I mean, it's work. It takes time. People leave conspiracy theories in much the same way that people leave cults, which is by staying, you know, people who care about them, staying connected with them, and gradually leading them back out. But you can't just go in and say you're wrong. That will cause people to withdraw from you. It has to be, you need to stay connected at an emotional level, strengthen the relationship, and they will naturally follow you.
Yeah, and aside from just the struggle and the difficulty of changing someone who has really gone down deeply into conspiracy theories, it does come back again to kind of, it makes it hard for us because the conspiracy theories themselves can be so extremely triggering to us because sometimes they seem to come out of, you know, just crazy land. And so part of your brain is just going, what? Come on, what?
Yeah.
So it's harder for us. The task is still kind of the same, but it's just, we have to work harder at compartmentalizing that and saying, okay, they just said something that I just really, really blew my mind with how much it offends me, but I need to set that, compartmentalize that and set it aside and still talk to them, the person.
Yeah.
Because and also conspiracy theories also beg you to come back with facts. Like, no, JFK Jr. is not alive.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Although maybe he is, I don't know.
Yeah. One of the ways I think that's helpful to think about this is, and maybe this comes more easily for me because of my medical training, but you know, as a doctor, you're trained that you can't lose your cool just because the world is falling apart around you, right? If I'm taking care of a patient and they're bleeding out in front of me, I don't have time to have an emotional reaction to what's going on with them. What they need from me in that moment is for me to be clear-headed and in control so that I can save their life. And I approach these conversations kind of like that. If someone is, you know, trapped in a conspiracy theory, that's that's kind of a psychological emergency. They are in a bad situation, and it's a social emergency for our society. So I really can't afford to be responding to that at this emotional level. It's understandable that I would be triggered by it, but I need to find a way to get over that so that I can interact with this person in a way that is helpful to them and helpful to our country and our planet.
Yeah, I had something I was going to say about that, and then it slipped right out of my mind, as these things do. We still have a lot of really great questions I want to get to. What was it about conspiracy theories? Oh, well, never mind. Melissa asked a question recently. Is the point to change a mind, or is the point to tolerate a different conversation? Because you took great care with Marilyn's feelings during the demo, but she did not with yours. And Marilyn added that it's often not reciprocal. So yeah, I think that changing the mind or tolerate a different conversation.
Yeah.
The point is more than
That's
tolerating
great.
a different conversation, but maybe less than changing a mind at that moment.
Right. So that is a great question. And the way I think about it is this: my long-term goal is having an impact on the way the person is thinking, but that I have no control over when that actually happens. It might happen in one conversation, or it might take 20, right? It also, I might plant the seed and they talk with someone else in a year, and that kind of finishes the job. So I can't make change the criteria for a successful conversation. And if I focus on change and whether or not change is happening, I'm likely to get really frustrated, because change is hard to see, particularly in just one conversation. And sometimes it's happening below the surface, or it'll happen after the conversation has ended and I won't see it at all. So where I always put my focus is on the process. What am I following the 5 steps of the change conversation cycle? Am I climbing the pyramid? And is she feeling safe enough? Is she increasingly trusting me? Are we achieving? Am I understanding her better? As long as those things are happening, then I am confident that I'm doing everything I can to make a difference. And I'm pretty confident that if I keep doing this over time, that change is of some kind is going to happen. It's kind of like, you plant an acorn and you take care of it, and you have a certain amount of faith that if well tended, that it will be an oak tree in 60 years, but I can't expect it to happen right now.
Also, there's a follow-up to your question, Marilyn, or I'm sorry, Melissa, that you followed up with about the care for her feelings, but she did not take care for your feelings.
Yeah.
I see this come up a lot with my friends who are just like, well, look, the Republicans aren't trying. They hate us. They're not doing this. And I always think, when Karen brings this up, I always think about her picture of the little girl at the beginning. It's like being in the backseat of the car and your brother's poking you in the backseat of the car. And your parents say, don't poke them back, just ignore them. Be the bigger person. That some of this work really does require a heroic effort of, I'm going to do this work even if they are not behaving, or they aren't giving me the same respect. Do you want to address that, Karen?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't, when I'm deciding what to do, I don't think in terms of what's fair. Like, yeah, we're doing a lot of work here. And when I'm in this conversation, I am carrying the larger burden. I am willing to do that because it works. I am ultimately a very pragmatic progressive. Like, I am doing the things that I think are most likely to move the needle. And if I don't carry the burden in that conversation, she's not going to change.
All right. A couple more questions. We have some really good ones tonight. It's a great group. I'm going to circle back to some of Marilyn's because she's been participating a lot. Covered. Jan, you had a question, and I want to see if I phrase this correctly. If I don't, feel free to hop on the mic and ask Karen directly. Jan, you asked, was there ever a point for a message such as, I am struggling with your statements, that I am just obeying blindly?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I did try to raise that a little bit. You probably noticed one of the things I did fairly early on in the dialogue was make it not about these strangers out in the world, but about me. Because she can, like, I can't speak to how the rest of the world is in a way that is going to be persuasive to her. Like, she has her own ideas about that, and that's fine, but I can speak to her about me and my experience. And so it's one thing for her to say that, well, the rest of the world is just a bunch of dupes and they're being tricked. But is she going to be able to say the same thing about me, this person who's sitting in front of her, who made the decision to get the vaccine? And so what I wouldn't do, I would be, and I think I tried to avoid this in the conversation, was to make her feel bad about it, because I don't want her to become defensive. I don't want her to feel like I'm saying she's a bad person. So what I did instead was express vulnerability. I tried to show her that I was feeling a little like, you know, are you are you saying I'm a bad person, or that I'm stupid?
I guess that was my question, because I think, like, when you talk about actively listening to someone, at some point when they continue to harp on that same thing, and I thought she was disrespectful to you.
Right.
At one point, do you say, you know, do you give some kind of message, you know, that says, you know, I think you know, that feels uncomfortable to me when, whatever.
Yeah, it's a balancing act. So there, the balance I was working toward was playing it in terms of vulnerability rather than coming back at her with hostility, right? I could have gone a different way, which would have been, you know, oh, so you're saying I'm stupid, that I'm a sheep, right? And that's gonna put her on the defensive. So can't do that. But one thing I think that's also relevant to the question you're asking, which is, what do you do if someone's just being repeatedly disrespectful to you and kind of, you know, and just is kind of violating norms of conversation? And I think in this conversation, she didn't do that. She repeatedly said that, well, that's your choice, and you know, she wasn't I didn't get the sense that she was being mean to me. If she was, I would have responded a bit differently, and in that case I would have used boundary setting, which is saying, you know, I really want to talk about this with you. I think it's an important conversation, but I think we have to agree that we're both going to treat each other with respect. Do you think you can agree with that? And that usually nips it. Sometimes if people are really triggered, they'll keep going and slip back into a more disrespectful thing, and you can kind of call them on it and say, remember, we were going to try to keep this respectful. Usually they will acknowledge that, and there, every once in a while somebody just can't hold it together. They're just too triggered, and they just keep disrespecting you or being mean or calling you names. And then I just say, you know what, let's talk about this another time when we're both in a better place.
That leads into a little bit, we had talked earlier about the conspiracy thing, about when you're presented with facts, they're so triggering, but also probably for most of us, especially online, just being called names, being, you know, is a very schoolyard instant trigger for a lot of our emotions. So I want to pivot from there to some of Marilyn's comments from a little while back about what happens when you just feel like you've given up and you face the irrationality. Marilyn asked, any suggestions on how to increase our tolerance level? I'm at about a 30-minute tolerance level, then I just give up. I know, Dr. Karen, you have some experience in exposure therapy.
Yeah. Exposure therapy is great. Although I want to say half an hour is pretty good. If you can hang in there for 30 minutes, you're already doing very, very well. Yeah, after Trump was elected, I had a really hard time. This was before I was doing a lot of these conversations. I actually couldn't watch the news. I couldn't read the newspaper, couldn't listen to NPR. It just triggered me so badly. I basically went into some kind of hibernation, and I quickly realized that was no way to live my life. Like, I wasn't going to be able to survive the next 4 years with no news. So I just kind of gradually started reintroducing media. And even though it was very upsetting for me, I did it in small doses initially, and then just gradually got bigger and bigger until I was back to consuming not quite as much media as I had before. I sort of stopped where at a point where I thought I had, was getting enough. And then to do this work, I realized, wow, these conversations are challenging. And it was over time, gradually having them, that I built up a tolerance for them. And all of this is basically the same as, what we teach or do with patients as psychiatrists and psychologists. We, if someone comes to us with a phobia, which is basically going into fight or flight at the sight of a spider, for example, we expose them to small spiders and then bigger spiders until eventually they're holding a tarantula in their hand and it doesn't bother them. That's what you need to do to get to a point that you can have these conversations without getting triggered.
Yeah, I think also part of it is I'm a film critic, film writer, so I always think of things in terms of films. But comedy and horror are two things that are very emotional, and they both work on surprise. They both work on showing you something you hadn't seen before, and that's what makes you scared, or that's what makes you laugh. And the same is the element of surprise. If you're in a conversation with someone and they bring up a conspiracy theory that is so crazy you've never heard it before, that takes you back, that knocks you off your heels. Yeah. If you have a little bit of exposure to it, you're like, yeah, I know there are people out there who believe that, so I won't be as emotionally shocked when this person says that. And so exposure therapy is just kind of wading into those waters. I do, Marilyn, I want to give you the mic for a second because you had a couple of questions or you had a story you wanted to share. I also, before we do that though, sorry, 1 second. We are coming up on we're at 2 hours and 20 minutes here. If you need to drop, go ahead. We're going to hang out here and keep asking questions and discussing. But don't feel bad if you need to go at this point. But Marilyn, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to offer Dr. Karen's process, something I experienced. It was pre-Trump. So 2014, 15, somewhere around there, I'm traveling around the country in an RV, and I'm up in Oregon. Blue Oregon, right? No, Oregon's blue only because of Portland. So I'm on the northeast coast of Oregon. I walk into a bar and a guy has one of those so this is under Obama. Guy has one of those "don't tread on me" shirts. And I just I just said, what does that mean? I knew what it meant, but I started with the asking the questions. I said, what does that mean? Don't tread on me. And there's this snake and,
Mhm.
you know, and so he says, this ridiculous Obama administration, socialism, government takeover of healthcare, blah, 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 Obamacare, going on and on. So I said, oh, so you're like against Obamacare? Let me tell you, you're against me having, so this is the sharing story part, Karen.
Mhm.
You're against me having healthcare because I tried to buy healthcare. I have the money. I want to buy healthcare, but they won't cover me. They won't cover me. It's only because of Obamacare that I'm able to get coverage under this restriction against insurance companies denying healthcare to people. So I said, I'm just trying to understand. So while you're worried about the government, you're also kind of like saying, I shouldn't have the right to healthcare. I'm trying to understand you, sir. And that just totally took him aback. I'm not sure
Mhm.
we ever reached on your circle the
Mhm.
notion of agreement, but it totally deflated the argument. There was no argument. And then
Mhm.
it kind of, we got back into questioning and kind of like, do you not think people should have a right to have healthcare, like even if they can afford to buy it? You know, I said, I was denied. I have money. I could afford to buy it, but they won't cover me. So that was my first experience without getting angry and yelling at somebody who had a do not tread on me. And I just said, I'm just going to play with this guy. I'm going to ask him a question. I'm going to see if I can find out what's motivating him and
Mhm.
see if he can understand my personal story. So I just wanted to verify that this notion of personal stories, and I've used it with abortion as well.
Mhm.
People think that, you know, they don't know anything about little 14-year-olds that are impregnated by their fathers. They don't think anything about a woman carrying twins. One is diseased, and if they abort one, the other one will be viable. You know, they don't think anything about real life stories when they make these decisions of being absolutist about a particular issue. So that's it. That's all I have.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. That is a great example of the power of stories. And, you know, whether or not the gentleman you described changed his mind, it's clear you gave him pause, and it was food for thought. And that is, you know, it's that kind of pause in our thinking that causes reevaluation of beliefs. And if we get enough of those pauses, then there, with those discrepancies, then we invest some time and energy in restructuring our belief systems.
And also they, you know, it's, you've lowered, they have the same stereotypes about us that we have about them. And they're like, okay, here comes a liberal who's going to yell at me about these things. And you showed them that, you know, not everyone is like that. And the next time they run into someone, maybe you've worn down that stereotype a little bit and they'll be a little more open to it. Sam, you had a good question, or you raised an issue that I wondered if you wanted to elaborate on or explain. As far as negativity wearing down your tolerance for being around certain people, places, empath protective type techniques, a cloak, imagine being in a cloak or being in a glass tube, and then HSPs. Oh, what is HSPs? That's what
Highly sensitive people.
Okay. Did you want to elaborate on that, Sam, or did anyone want to? It's up to you.
I'll just be really, really quick, but just to learn about what it means to be a highly sensitive person, because I feel like a lot of reluctancies to talk to people about things that are really dear to you. I think HSPs are on both sides, Democrats, Republicans, all of it. And it's good to understand different people's sensitivities and what they can be dealing with and what you can be dealing with and ways that you can help to respect yourself, your own boundaries, and to recognize them in others as well.
Yeah,
To help
yeah.
them.
That's absolutely true. Like we have to, you know, you have to take care of yourself before you can go into these conversations. And there are a lot of things that you can do to increase your tolerance. You know, meditation, doing like exposure outside of conversations is a way to doing it. Also, you know, learning how to set boundaries so that if someone is misbehaving, you can cut them down, you know, stop them and remove yourself from the situation. Like all of those things are really important skills to master, along with all of the stuff we're talking about tonight.
Does anyone else, I tried to cover most of the questions or general topics that I had in the chat. Does anyone else have any questions or further questions? We can just keep going as long as you guys are comfortable. Shouldn't say that on Karen's behalf. However long as Karen wants to keep going.
I'm good. I'm on the West Coast. The night is still young.
Yeah, raise your hand or speak up if you have a follow-up question or if we haven't addressed something that you've been on your mind. Well, one thing I will say is that with the highly sensitive persons as a particular type of person, but also I think part of the empathy is realizing that all of us on all sides between the past 4 years of Trump and the past 2 years of COVID, everybody's sensitivity levels have been really messed up, you know, and we're all a little more sensitive right now. We're all a little more raw, quick to emotions, quick to choose sides.
Yeah,
and that's true.
We're exhausted. Yeah, we've been through the ringer on this, and there's been a lot of trauma. That's one way to look at it. And then anybody who has a history of trauma, this work is harder because you're more vulnerable to being triggered.
Ari, you have a question? Go ahead. Did you?
Yeah, I just hope, you know, you were talking about trauma, and that actually is a great introduction to what I was saying, because my tolerance is so low for, you know, the others. I don't even really have to have these conversations with family. The family isn't close, and when we do get together, we don't tend to talk politics. I have one family member who he is out there. He, you know, believes in the conspiracy theories, and you know that that vaccines are tainted, and not just the COVID vaccine, but like he's a strong anti-vaxxer now. He believes it caused his stepson's autism, and but and I mean other things, like he thinks the earth is flat. And when I heard that one, I was just like, you know, I don't even know where to start with that. So I almost feel like I would be more likely to have a conversation with someone that I'm not related to more than someone I am related to, because it's almost like my sensitivity is even less with family than it is with a stranger or an acquaintance or something.
Yeah, it can depend on the nature of the prior relationship. Like how before, like if you separate out the politics, like how strong is the relationship apart from that? And I mean, the family relationship is a double-edged sword in political work, because you're right. On the one hand, there may be like the kind of historical traumas within the family relationship that make it easier for you to get triggered. So I don't have the world's greatest relationship with my mom. I can get triggered talking with her about the turkey at Thanksgiving. It doesn't it doesn't take much. And so, you add politics to that, and then that can be even a harder thing. But at the same time, because she's my mom, I love her and she loves me, and we have a much stronger desire to work through our differences ultimately on political issues. Like, I care about what she thinks and she cares about what I think, even if we disagree about things. So you have more influence over family members generally than you do over some random person on the street, precisely because of that connection. But because you don't care about the random person on the street as much, you are less likely to get triggered by them. So it definitely is a different experience.
Do we have other questions? I know we've kind of hit the 2.5 hour mark, and I don't know if we wanted to go through and do another demo. If anyone wanted to participate in a demo, it's up to you guys. Those of you, the ones who are still hanging in here.
I'm a little worried that I won't be able to sort of recall these lessons when I'm in the heat of a moment.
Mhm.
That, because now I understand why, what is it? The amygdala or the
Amygdala hijacking. Yes.
Yeah, it's stopping thinking.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. So yeah. Often the first step if you're worried about getting triggered is to have a plan. So think about, if I get triggered, how am I going to deal with it in this conversation? And a lot of times that just means having an exit plan. You can say, you know what, and this is a really important conversation, but I don't think now's the best time to have it. So, let's do this later, and I'll get back to you. Or you can say, I have to go to the bathroom. I'm so sorry. Please excuse me. It is better to, if you feel yourself getting triggered and you don't think you can restabilize yourself in that moment, then it's better to get out and rather than, let your amygdala take over in the responding, and that way you maintain control of the situation, and you can come back later after you've kind of processed what's happened and restart.
Also, you always talk about, I posted that PDF and the link in the chat with the pyramid and especially the change conversation cycle. Karen recommends printing it out and clipping it, especially when you're talking to people online, clipping it to the side of your computer screen as just a reminder.
And in the pre-pandemic world, I used to hand it out on business cards. Like, it was on all my business cards.
And we often talk about how the idea behind the change conversation cycle and having these 5 steps. Thank you so much, Laura, for participating. Is just practice and repetition, almost muscle memory. And so you get to a point where you know the cycle so well that you just automatically fall back to it, even in a moment of panic or even in a moment of triggered reaction. Jan did ask that she would love to see another demo. Do we have time or the energy to? And I think
as long as someone is willing to step up.
Marilyn is willing to take the other side. Does someone? Do you want to? There's several ways we can do this. You guys out there can both do the. Okay, so Kate, we have Kate and Marilyn. Which of you wants to take which side? Which of you wants to practice being a smart politics Yeah.
I want to take the role of my mother.
Okay.
All right, let's do it.
So,
Okay, so this has a past though. So let me say the past real quick. So that she can know what we're getting into. Let me turn this camera on. I'm a little sick and I'm not thinking so clearly. So I was married and I was abused, but the person I was married to was transgender. My mom's a Republican. So there's a little bit of personal history.
Yeah.
So I had to work really hard to learn how to accept transgender because I have a son. And so, of course, I wanted to be the most emotionally healthy for him. So that's what I did. Anyway, so now we're getting these conversations with my mother, and it's rough.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah.
So who is going to be the?
So I think Marilyn, you are going to practice what you call the Dr. Karen approach or the smart politics approach, and Kate, you are going to present your mother's sort of take on things.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. I'm going to put the cycle back on the screen so to make it easier for everybody. There. Can you see it?
Yes. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Marilyn, are you there?
Yeah, let me figure out what I'm doing because I'm on my phone. Okay, are you hearing me? Yeah,
I can hear
are you
you.
hearing me? Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I need this practice. Why do you think I'm in this webinar, my dear?
Okay. I'm gonna try to be ready. Those transgender people, they're just all sick. I don't know what this world is coming to. They just all want to cater to transgender people. They get everything they want, and they're all very sick. They should all be in the hospital.
Wow. I don't know much about this subject. Can you tell me more about it? Because I don't know any transgender people. What are you saying? They're trying to do what? Can you help me understand?
Well, they're men who are trying to say that they're women, and women that are trying to say they're men, and that is just biologically impossible. It is just impossible. There are just two genders, and there is male and female, and being homosexual and being transgender is psychological disorders, and all this catering to them is just allowing disorders in our lives.
Can I ask you something? Because I don't know too much about this. Are there a lot of people in the world that are considered transgender? You know,
well,
like
it seems like
is
every
this
day
just-
on the
is this just one or two people, or like 5 or 10 that are trying to exploit some advantage, or is this like a common thing in society?
I mean, it's common. They're changing the bathrooms and everything. It's just, these people aren't transgender. They just are just doing that to get attention. They just want attention.
Are you sure about that? Did you
Yes,
look
I
into it?
am.
Oh, okay. I was just
I know
wondering.
what I'm talking about. I have an education.
Yeah, I
And
didn't
these
know.
Democrats don't know anything.
No, I'm not taking a political position on it. I'm just wondering if you had looked into the medical issue, because, it's so interesting how humans are evolving. Wait a minute, I got to tell you this. I've even heard about birds that are showing two genders. Can you imagine? There's this thing called evolution, and maybe humans are changing. I have no idea.
Well, they're changing the wrong way, but that's all nonsense. Oh, well, I know what I'm talking about and you don't.
Marilyn,
Well, wait a minute. I'm willing to admit that. I don't know anything.
No, you're supposed to bite back.
I don't know any transgender people. I don't know too much about it. but I find the issue interesting that there seems to be more and more as time goes on. It makes me wonder about the issue of like human evolution. Is
Mhm.
it kind of like changing gender? I don't know. I don't
Mm.
know. Are your beliefs and your, it seems a little bit like you have anger. Is it based in religion or in some kind of value, you know, that I'm not
Oh no, I
identifying with?
believe in science. I don't believe in religion. But the
Okay.
science is that there are women with vaginas and men with penises, and all this nonsense about the in between, all this nonsense about people wanting different genders. We're not evolving, we're evolving backwards.
But why do you say backwards? I don't know that in the past that there was this gender fluidity. Is that a new thing, or do you see something in history that
It's
shows
all these
evolving? What?
new people trying to accept everyone. That's the problem. That's the
Okay,
problem.
I'm gonna pause for a second.
Yes.
Marilyn, you're doing great. You're doing great. One thing though I want you to try is a reflection.
Yeah, I really don't know much about the subject, so I'm asking questions.
So all you,
but
this
you're
is the
right.
great thing. This is the great thing. All you need to do is say back what she said.
Okay.
You don't need to add any outside information, just what she said.
Okay, so I'm trying to understand, you're saying that you think this is kind of a political movement almost? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it is. You're right.
It's
Yeah.
a political movement that people are trying to get some kind, like to be able to use whatever bathroom they want. I don't know.
Oh yeah. Or just to get what they want. You know, like they get whatever they want, and you know, and then they don't want to work. So, and I've done research on this, and apparently all the transgender people can't get work just because they don't want to. So they're using that.
So they're not being discriminated against. It's because they really don't want to work. They're just claiming discrimination. Is that it? Oh, okay.
Yeah. Oh man, I'm on the opposite side and I feel listened to.
There you go. There you go. All right, Marilyn, now it's time to go in with the agree.
Yeah, I agree that it would be weird for people to try to like make up something that isn't real to try to get some advantage of society. Boy, I think that's weird. But I still don't know enough about this whole, you know, the medical background behind the issue and everything. It's so interesting to me because I don't have enough information. But I hear what you're saying. I'm going to have to investigate it further.
This is great, you guys. You did a really good job.
I can't argue with that. Yeah, Marilyn did a wonderful job. I was really trying to be mean. I interrupted you and everything.
No, it was easy for me because it's all legit. I know nothing about transgender. I find it interesting. I think it's part of evolution, but whatever. Okay.
Well, so you've picked up on an important part of doing these conversations, which is they're a lot easier when you get into a position of curiosity.
Yeah.
When you really become interested in what the other person believes and why they believe it, then you can kind of set aside a lot of those feelings. One of the things I do is I come at this almost like an anthropologist, you know, some other kind of social scientist, just being like, wow, like, you know, I wonder how this person came up with this particular worldview. I bet there's an interesting story here that, you know, I can find out if I ask enough questions.
Dr. Karen, the only thing I wished I would have followed up with is tell me like something about your life or your experience that helps me understand where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Like, I
Yeah.
don't know much about this. I don't know any transgender people. So can
Yeah.
you share with me your experience with this?
Right. Yeah. That if you elicit people's personal stories in those first few questions, that can be really helpful. So something like, so it sounds like this issue is really important to you. Have you had an experience that has made this so important?
Yeah, because then the mother would have probably said, yes, my daughter, blah, 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 you know, and I didn't get to that point. So, but I wanted to practice not being triggered by it, but it was too easy for me because this is not an issue I feel strongly about one way or the other.
Ah,
So Kate, that would have
But
been
I should
harder
have
for you,
asked
it
you,
sounds
I
like.
should have asked
Yeah.
you to share your story. Share your
well,
story.
I think also what's hard for me is like that my mother knows a transgender person, which is my ex.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I can't really ask curiosity questions like that.
Right, right.
But I'll think of something.
So I wasn't a good reflection of you being in this situation because
No, actually you were, because I was struggling emotionally with the reflecting part. So I think it was really good for me, actually.
okay, good. I just was
Yeah.
trying my best because I don't know much about the subject.
No, I think you
did
did. But
great.
if you want to know more, I'm happy to tell you. But
And that again, Marilyn, is one of the important things that came across here, which is you don't need to know that much about the subject to reflect back what the other person is saying, because you're not passing judgment on whether what they are saying is true or not. So you're just reiterating what you have heard.
Yes,
Right.
thank you for that. Thank you for that feedback. I totally skipped the reflect. Thank you.
Okay, yay.
One of the things that's
Thank you.
interesting, yeah, very good job, both of you. Thank you.
thank you.
One of the things that's interesting, and this comes up in Dr. David Camp's stuff on white allies and racism, is admitting your vulnerability or your confusion or your own struggle. And I do this a lot when I'm talking to relatives, is to say, hey, I understand that something like transgender, or before that, homosexuality, or even racism, I understand sometimes these create these feelings, and I've struggled with them myself, trying to understand them, or trying to, and I'm still working at it. Because one of the things that they have the impression of us elite progressive liberals is that we know we're perfect and we know everything, and we're just always talking down to them about how they're not living up to our standards of behavior and thought. And so when you say things like, hey, you know, it's been kind of a journey for me, and again, this probably, Kate, this may not apply directly to your particular situation with your mom because of the dynamics of it, but in general, to say, you know, I'm working on this too, and I'm trying to better understand this particular issue and how these people feel, and I'm not always successful at it, but I'm giving it a shot.
Yeah. Offering empathy and compassion can really go a long way. Often the biggest barrier in a situation like this, and it sounds like, you know, assuming you are channeling your mother fairly accurately, my guess would be that she has just a lot of fear. She's struggling with her, she's feeling like the world is changing and it doesn't make sense to her anymore, and that's really scary. And so offering a little empathy for that, like, wow, this must be really scary for you, Mom, I'm sorry it's so hard, can actually go a tremendous way toward helping people make that transition.
Yeah, and also in addition to the two things that come up on most with LGBTQ rights and this are, one is fear, as Karen just said. The other one is the value of disgust, that it bothers them on some level, on some personal level. But the third one that you actually brought up was, and this comes up a lot, is someone's getting away with something. They're getting away with something on me. They're using this to get an advantage or to be lazy or to not work. And you hear that a lot in a lot of discussions. Obamacare, affirmative action, you know, someone's trying to get one up on me, cut to the head of the line.
Yep. And offering compassion for that emotion without saying, I agree that that is factually true, that is happening. Just, wow, having that feeling that sounds really scary. Or, you know, I would be really resentful too if I thought that was happening.
I also wanted to roll back when I said disgust. It's a tough word to say because we really don't want, it's not the right response and it doesn't feel right, but you should be aware that is in the mix somewhere, possibly.
We can't, yeah, it's really important not to pass judgment on emotions. Emotions are there, whether we want them to be or not. And so we can't judge people for feeling disgust. What we can help them do is get past disgust. And one way to do that is to be sensitive of the fact that that's happening, and name it, and maybe even acknowledge a time when we experienced a similar feeling.
Yeah, I just bring that up because I feel guilty even saying it.
I know.
Coming out of my mouth, it sounds like, oh God, that is not something I want to bring up on this issue. I don't want to talk about that on this issue.
Because there's shame. We have shame that we feel disgust. If, you know, there are certain emotions which are very taboo.
Yeah, but it does help to understand where they might be coming from.
Right.
Do we have other questions or comments about either that demo or other questions about anything? We're kind of heading up at the 3-hour mark. You guys are super troopers for hanging in there. I really appreciate everyone's comments and questions. So to circle back on a couple of things, housekeeping things, Karen promises that tomorrow she's going to get the emails
I'm going to try.
She's going to try tomorrow before the holidays. That email will be sent to you as a register of this group. You will get an email that has a link to the video of this whole presentation, as well as this presentation slide deck. And then moving into 2022, January, February, we are talking about future webinars. Karen, you mentioned one about controlling your emotions, might be a future webinar. So we're looking at some sort of more advanced or intermediate webinars that move beyond just this initial introduction. And so we are happy to, if you have any suggestions or questions, like, oh, I would love to have a full webinar about this or that, either let us know now or shoot Karen an email or a message somehow.
What is my group? You can go to Join Smart.
Are you typing that in?
I am, very slowly. There. Yeah. And then we also have a group on Facebook for the Smart Politics group on Facebook. I don't know how many people are still on Facebook. It's hard to tell. But we have about 10,000 members in that group. And what we try to do is kind of troubleshoot different challenges we're encountering, especially on social media, and give each other advice and recommendations and support.
Ari, did that get you the information?
I understand about boycotting Facebook. Yeah, it's a tough call.
All right. Any other comments or questions? Thank you all so much.
Thanks, everybody.
It's really great.
Have a wonderful Thanksgiving. and enjoy and Happy New Year and happy holidays and all that good stuff.